When you're involved in an accident, you may think the situation is straightforward. You might believe the other person is completely at fault and that you should receive full compensation for your injuries, medical bills, and other losses. But in reality, things are not always that simple. In many legal cases, fault is not 100% on one side. That's where the concept of comparative negligence comes in. Understanding how comparative negligence works can make a huge difference in the outcome of your claim and in how much compensation you ultimately receive. Comparative negligence is a legal principle used to determine how much each party involved in an accident is at fault. Instead of assigning all blame to one person, it divides responsibility between all parties based on the percentage of fault. Your compensation is then reduced by the percentage of fault that is assigned to you. The purpose is to make sure each person pays for the portion of the damages they actually caused. Let's start with a simple example. Imagine you are in a car accident and your total damages amount to $100,000. If you are found to be 20% at fault because you were driving slightly over the speed limit, and the other driver was 80% at fault for running a red light, your compensation will be reduced by 20%. This means you would receive $80,000 instead of the full amount. There are different types of comparative negligence rules, and the system used depends on the state where the accident happened. The first type is called pure comparative negligence. In a pure comparative negligence system, you can recover damages no matter how high your share of fault is. Even if you were 90% responsible, you could still recover 10% of your damages from the other party. States such as California, Florida, and New York follow this rule. The second and most common type is called modified comparative negligence. Under this system, there is a limit to how much fault you can have and still receive compensation. The threshold is usually either 50% or 51%, depending on the state. In a 50% bar state, if you are found to be 50% or more at fault, you cannot recover any damages. In a 51% bar state, you must be less than 51% at fault to receive compensation. States like Texas, Colorado, and Illinois follow the modified comparative negligence system. There's also a much stricter rule called contributory negligence, which only a few states still use, including Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. In contributory negligence states, if you are found to be even 1% at fault, you cannot recover any compensation at all. This can be harsh, and it often leads to cases where injured people receive nothing, even if the other party was mostly to blame. How is comparative negligence determined? In most cases, the percentage of fault is decided by insurance adjusters during claim negotiations or by a judge or jury if the case goes to court. They look at the available evidence such as police reports, photographs, videos, witness statements, and sometimes expert testimony. The process is not always black and white. It can be subjective, which is why having strong evidence and legal representation is so important. Comparative negligence can apply to many different types of personal injury cases. In car accidents, for example, you might be partially at fault if you were distracted, speeding, or failing to signal, even if the other driver made a bigger mistake. In slip and fall cases, you could be assigned some fault if you were not watching where you were walking, even if the property owner failed to maintain safe conditions. The same concept can apply in workplace injury claims or even in medical malpractice cases. Insurance companies often use comparative negligence as a way to reduce the amount they have to pay you. They might argue that you bear a higher percentage of fault than you actually do. That's why it's important to protect yourself by gathering evidence immediately after an accident. This can include taking photos of the scene, collecting witness information, getting a copy of the police report, and seeking medical treatment as soon as possible. Let's go through some practical examples to see how this works in real life. Imagine a car accident where your damages total $50,000. If you are found to be 30% responsible because you were speeding slightly and the other driver ran a stop sign, you would recover $35,000 in a pure comparative negligence state. In a modified comparative negligence state with a 51% bar, you would also recover $35,000 because your share of fault is under the limit. But if you were found 55% responsible, you would get nothing. In another example, suppose you slipped and fell in a grocery store where the floor was wet with no warning signs. If the court finds you 40% at fault because you were looking at your phone instead of paying attention, and your damages are $20,000, your recovery would be reduced to $12,000. One key point to remember is that the exact percentage of fault assigned to you can make a huge difference in how much you recover. Even a small change in that percentage can mean losing thousands of dollars. That's why it's important to work with an attorney who can challenge unfair fault assessments and present strong evidence on your behalf. Comparative negligence laws are meant to be fair, but they can be complicated. Knowing how they work in your state is crucial because the rules are different across the country. The system you are in will determine whether you can recover damages and how much. If you're in a pure comparative negligence state, you can always recover something as long as you weren't 100% at fault. If you're in a modified comparative negligence state, you have to be under the fault threshold. And if you're in a contributory negligence state, any fault at all could block your recovery completely. At the end of the day, comparative negligence doesn't always mean you will lose your case. It just means that the amount you recover will be adjusted based on your level of responsibility. The goal is to make sure each person involved in the accident pays for their fair share of the damages. If you understand this concept and take steps to gather strong evidence, you can improve your chances of getting the maximum compensation possible for your claim. If you are dealing with a case where comparative negligence might apply, act quickly. Preserve evidence, keep detailed records of your injuries and expenses, and speak with an experienced attorney who can protect your rights. By doing so, you give yourself the best chance to counter insurance company tactics and to ensure you are compensated fairly for your losses. Comparative negligence can be the difference between getting the settlement you deserve and walking away with far less than you need. Understanding how it works is the first step in protecting yourself and making informed decisions during your claim.